here. And if you want to drop in the chat, kind of like we normally do, where you are, what you're doing these days, what you're teaching or supervising. I know some of you are repeat attenders, so if you don't mind reminding us. My name is Meredith White. I teach Spanish just outside of Atlanta, teaching Spanish 1 and 2. We finish Wednesday. This is, Chris, you are session, let me think. Hold on, math is hard. 40 of 44. So we're winding up. We're just like right at the end of this, which is the end of the school year, which means, oh my God. So yeah, you've got a fellow New Yorker in there too. Tori's in Salamanca. I just saw her name like pop up, but I know she's in there. I'm sure that's what she said. So we've got California, DC. We've got kind of all over the map here. So, Chris, if people aren't familiar with, I'm going to pop in your Instagram. I'm going to pop in that Spotify link that you sent me. So a bunch of things in the chat, but if they're not familiar with your work and your Instagram and your other things and your content, if you could, I'm going to let Andrea in, and then I'm going to turn off the waiting room. So tell us where you are these days and what you're up to.
All righty. Hola, hola. My name is Chris Rogers. I teach, I'm all over the place this year. So let me explain why I'm all over the place this year, because when I say like what my position is, most people are like, oh my gosh. But when I give the context of my position, then it makes sense. So I teach in Schenectady, New York. It's just outside of Albany, the capital of New York. It's a crappy little town, but you know, it is what it is. So in the school district that I teach in, COVID hit us hard. And so COVID hit us hard financially. So my school district, they didn't know what they were going to do. So since they didn't know what they were going to do with COVID and everything, and there was a budget crisis, they thought that it was muy inteligente to lay off 106 instructional staff. Que barbaridad, right? So because of that, my position was supposed to be teaching Spanish 7 and Spanish 8 this year. Now I am 100% virtual. I teach Spanish 7, Spanish 8, and Spanish 1. I teach 0.6 at a middle school, 0.4 at a high school, and I have 3 preps, and it is craziness. So yeah.
So you're not busy at all. Everything's fine. You're not.
You know, and then I also, because yo tengo una obsesión con dinero. Right? So I also run the culinary after school program, which sounds fancy, but all it is I'm 23. So what happened was we were doing this after school program, and I'm like, $35 an hour to be on the computer for 2 hours? Heck yeah. And then they told me we need somebody to do the cooking lessons. And I said, I'll do the cooking lessons. And this was my mindset, okay? I live by myself. I'm 23. I hate grocery shopping. The school district will buy my groceries, have me cook with them, and I'm getting paid to do it. And so it was a no-brainer. So, so I also run the cooking program at my after-school program. So students have seen almost every part of my house except for my bedroom and my bathroom.
Amazing.
Because I have classes in my kitchen, classes in my laundry room office, and then sometimes I have classes in my living room because I like to show off my tapestry that says "Respect the Drip, Karen." So yeah.
Like, Profe, where are we today? We're over here, and now we're over here, and now that's so funny. What room shall we lounge in? Probably the kitchen. That's so fun. I had a girl who her mic doesn't work. She has neither a mic nor a camera, like on whatever device. And like, you know how the kids are like, I don't have a mic, but you can see a little mic, like, you know, they do on Zoom. Hers legitimately has nothing next to it. She is on the call, but she is not, like, you're not going to hear or see her. And so she's so funny. So she would type in the chat, and anytime she'd get on the call like 30 minutes prior. There was a week that because of a colleague, I was quarantined for like the whole week. And so I was teaching from home. And so I just had her like sitting on my counter, and I was like, Brianna, what are we gonna make today? Like, so she's been all around my house. I'm like, let me set you down for a second. Like, and I'm watching the chat. Are you doing laundry? Yes, your class has not started yet. I'm throwing a load of clothes in. Like,
That's
I'm home.
funny.
Like, so it was just her, but I've never heard her voice, seen her face. No idea who this kid is. Yeah.
My 4th period class, that's the class right before lunch. And so in this class, they have seen me do everything in my Instapot.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so one day, like, we were having like I call them mental health Fridays, because I'm drained, you're drained, so let's just chill. So I just play like some salsa music and we just hang out on a Google Meet.
Yep.
And so what I end up doing with that is they saw me making empanadas.
Delicious. Absolutely. Why not? Welcome, everyone.
All right.
That's so
and so what I'm doing right now is I'm modeling restorative practices in what I do in my classroom. But then also I want to give y'all like a little appetizer of what my principal calls the Rogers experience. Mm-hmm. So it's not just Mr. Rogers' class or La Clase de Español. At the school that I teach at, it is known as the Rogers experience, and you will leave changed. And so I just thought that was like a nice little compliment my admin gave me during my observation.
Thank you. Right. Amen.
So today what we're going to be talking about is restorative justice, more so on restorative practices. And what does that look like in the world language classroom? Now, one of the things that I really enjoy talking about when I get into restorative practices is really talking about, as a world language teacher, restorative practices actually makes it easier for us to get our students in the target language and getting our students right and going with the different, with the 5 C's that ACTFL lays out for us. And so I'm gonna talk to you what I do. If you look at the Spotify link that Meredith put in the chat, I give some really good advice. Because the biggest thing that I always talk about whenever I talk about this is I'm 23. So I started teaching at 21, didn't know what the hell I was doing. But you know what? We just figure it out as we go. And I'm really comfortable with having what we call difficult conversations. And part of it is because of my race. I know some people don't have their cameras on, but usually I'm one of the only Black educators in a meet, in a thing, and 9 times out of 10 I'm one of the only males in a meet too. Thinking about our demographics as foreign language teachers, so I really think that puts me instead of an awkward position or like a disadvantage, I look at it as an advantage, because as an African-American male, there's specific conversations I can have in my classroom that are easier than what, my Caucasian counterparts can do. And so instead of like looking at it like advantage or disadvantage, what I always tell my colleagues is we feed off of each other, and we grow and we learn together to make sure that we're providing the best education possible for our students. So let me give you some context of where I teach. And I teach in Schenectady City School District. It's a Title I school. 60% of our population are Black and Brown students. And I grew up in this community, so I'm teaching back at home. And so like, I always tell the kids, oh, I'm in my stomping grounds. Like, I'm like, you know where your locker was last year? That was my locker. So it's kind of fun. And so when we're talking about different uncomfortable conversations, it really just brings the point home, because my students can relate with me on my gender, they can relate with me on my race, but they can also relate with me with life experiences from the community. And so I really appreciate having all those advantages. And I told them that they're going to have to drag my fat ass out of my school district. If they want to fire me, like, they're going to have to drag me out, because I'm not leaving.
By my cold, dead fingers, okay? In the doorway.
I told my principal that. I'm like, if you decide not to recommend me for tenure, you're going to have to drag me out of here, and I'm fat, so good luck with that. She got a good laugh out of that. So this presentation that I'm going to share with you is, I did not create it. My awesome coworker created it, but she gave me permission to share it because it's a really good framework. Mm-hmm. So can everybody see my screen? Awesome sauce. Okay. So my first thing, and I'm going to ask everybody in the question, I'm not going to play this video, but I will put the link in the chat. If you've been in education for a while, you've probably seen this video. It's a powerful video. It's by Rita Pearson, and she talks about every child needing a superhero. And I really like this video, and I put it in the chat for y'all because it's powerful. But my question that I have for y'all is, when you think relationships in your classroom, what comes to mind? So you can unmute, or you can write in the chat, whatever's comfortable. I know some of you have families and maybe you have kids in the background and you don't want to unmute, but feel free to use the chat.
I was going to say for mine too, just thinking about this year, as anybody unmutes or puts in the chat or anything, I think of laughter. And I think that's why this year's been really, one way that this year has been really depressing is it's just like, there's just no laughter. Like, to me, that laughter, that joy, that I think of those relationships, like we're enjoying being in each other's company. And this year that's been really hard to feel, like hard to manifest.
Mm-hmm. I love how somebody said building trust. Now I'm going to add in, what does building trust look like in your classroom?
That's a good thought. Like, what is, yeah. Yes, Steph, I agree. Taking care of each other, right? Like looking, like keeping an eye out, you know.
I agree with both of those. And I recently had a situation where I was standing on a chair in my classroom and fell on the floor. To my kids' credit, none of them laughed.
That's great.
I knew I was going down. It was terrible. Yeah, I was like, I tried so hard to catch myself and failed spectacularly. It was awesome. But yeah, they were really sweet. One of my kids came up to me later and was like, I didn't realize what happened to you. Like, you let out like this little scream. I said, I don't even remember screaming. She goes, no, it was like a little scream, like you dropped a pen. I was like, right. Oh, laughing scream. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. So, she's like, you're on the floor, and I was so confused.
I'm huge on TikToks. Like, they're my favorite. And so there's this one sound. I don't know if y'all are familiar with Hip Hop Harry. So there's this one sound where it's like, go, 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 go. Who's next? Where's my phone? I don't even know where my phone is. Maybe later. So when we were talking about irregular verbs in Spanish 1, when we were talking about tango, ha, go, sal, go, I started playing that song. And so again, this is my ceiling right here. You can't really see it, but right here. So I'm on my chair dancing, and I fall and hit my head on the other wall. Thank God they were freshmen.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's okay. And I wasn't in the school building, so I couldn't file for workers' comp.
Dang it. Go, go, go. Yeah. He went, okay?
So the biggest thing that I want to bring out is that building trust and building community, that is our main job, right? Connecting with our students, because one of the things that Rita Pearson brings out is that if there is no relationships, if they don't trust you enough, then they're not going to do work for you, right? And so relationships is the cornerstone of a successful classroom. And that is what restorative practices is based on. So in my class, what I do on the first week is I find different music because I love music. And I find different songs to introduce a lesson. And so there was this one song that I used called Rise Up. And it basically talked about people die, people are sad, people are not kind. But yet, if we just compromise and communicate, no, it's by this guy named Andy something. I'd have to find the song. But he talks about we just need to compromise and love each other is like the theme. And so I play this song on the day we come up with classroom norms. I don't believe in classroom rules. I tell my students rules are meant to be broken, but norms, norms are there so that we can have what's called a normal class environment. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so that's what I do. I will find the song. All right, that's the second thing I'm going to find for y'all before the end of this Zoom. All right, so I wanted to start off by seeing how does everybody view their relationships? And I think it's important in what we say because, me being a young teacher and like I started off at Catholic school. And so the person who I shared my room with was 60. And so she's talking to me. She's like, bitch to December. And she was like, that's how you have to be. And I totally understand that philosophy, but I'm not changing my personality for a philosophy, right? I'm kind, I'm bubbly, and I just tell my students, like, I don't play. I'm like, you see this happy person, but you cross a boundary and there's going to be a problem. Vamos a tener muchos problemas. And so that's just something important to me is that when we're thinking about this, I'm not going to change who I am. I'm not going to change who I am for admin. I'm not going to change who I am for my coworkers. And I'm damn sure not going to change myself for 12 and 13-year-olds.
Absolutely not.
And so with that being said, relationships is what helps me thrive. And even though I teach fully virtually, I can say I have a relationship with 85% of my students.
Absolutely. I just mentioned in the chat sort of the same thing. I think that's one part that's been really disconcerting this year is exactly that you can get so many great relationships virtually. And then I've got face-to-face students that I'm like, crickets. Mm-hmm. And that's so weird to me because you think my expectation would have been like, this is going to be kind of hard virtually to like really get to know them. But like the face-to-face, like that's my jam. Good morning, buenos dias, hola Cris, that kind of thing, whatever, nothing. Like crickets. And then with some Zoomy, like the roomies, they could take or leave the whole experience. Maybe it seems, that's the story that I've created in my head. And the Zoomies, I'm like, hi. And we're all like, good morning. Da-da-da-da. Isn't that weird? Like super weird.
I agree with that. And one of the things that I've said is, and I made this known because in our professional development at the beginning of the year, when we were trying to like grapple with, we're virtual. They're like, well, how are we going to enforce rules? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And I'm just like, so we don't have a camera policy in my school district because of equity, because a lot of our students live in poverty. Right. And they were like, well, how are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? I'm like, what are you talking about? So I got pissed off. This was like a few weeks into the school year. I got really pissed off in a meeting. And so literally I unmuted and I slammed my hand down on my desk. And I said, we're in their houses.
Right.
This is their safe space. If it's a safe space, why are we trying to bring like the traditional systems of school into this virtual environment? Our instructional strategies, our pedagogical, our pedagogy has to change to reflect this learning environment that we're in. We can't bring what works in the classroom virtually. Now, there's some things that do work, obviously, but we can't bring every single approach that we would do in person virtually. A, parents are listening, and B, it's just not going to work because you know what students can do? They can mute you. They can leave, right? And so we got to find a way to gauge them, and that's why relationships are so important in the virtual environment.
Absolutely.
Alrighty. So one of the things when we're talking about restorative practices is there are different tiers. So tier 1 is just the basics, community building. Tier 2 is conflict resolution, and tier 3 is like something, a volcano just exploded and we have to make sure that we're not walking on ash. So I'm just going to focus on tier 1 with y'all because those are that's the basis. And a lot of teachers who've been trained in restorative practices, who've gone through the intense training, still aren't really comfortable with tier 2, tier 3, but a tier 1 is a more obtainable goal. And so I'm a pragmatic educator. And so I like to share, useful tips that you could bring into class tomorrow, because I feel like a lot of PD so like philosophical, and you're just like, what can I do tomorrow with this information? So the first thing we need to know is that when we're talking about community circles, we're focusing on building relationships, and the goal is to bring harmony in the school community. And so that means that we want to be building vertical communities and horizontal communities. And what I mean by that is I work at a middle school for the most part. I consider myself a middle school teacher before I consider myself a high school teacher. And so thinking about this, I teach 7th grade. I love teaching 7th grade. It's my jam. I know some people are afraid of 7th graders, but I love them. And one of the things that I love about them is that they're always willing to take a risk, and they're always willing to like challenge themselves, because they're getting to the point where they care about people's opinions, but also they don't care about embarrassing themselves, especially if their teacher's embarrassing themselves. And so when I'm talking about building community, it's with their classmates around them, like as on the teams that I teach on. But then I'm big on creating horizontal communities. And so a lot of things you'll hear me saying in my classroom is, well, if a 6th grader had a question on how to conjugate a verb, how would you be able to conjugate that? How would you explain it to them? If a 6th grader was having a hard time with a classmate, what's a coping mechanism that you can tell them to help them deal with the situation? If when you're an 8th grader next year, what are you going to tell to 7th graders next year to prepare them for my class? So all these type of questions are really building not only our community as a grade level, as a team, but also it's thinking of the bigger picture, the bigger school environment in and of itself. And then by doing that, it just helps for students who have me. Like, for example, we had a fire drill the other day when I went into person, because we have students who learn virtually from school. So I went in to drop off some packets and to drop off some Takis to some students. And so when I went in, there was a fire drill, and my students were setting such a really good example. They're like, Mr. Rogers, the 6th grade class is on the other side of the field. And so that's why we're quiet. So when they come to you next year, they know what the expectation is during fire drills. And so building that relationship and building those communities, from horizontal communities and vertical communities, that helps bring that harmony and helps you accelerate whatever your school vision is. So when we're thinking about what we do to start these dialogues to build that community, it's just a lot of like norms that you would set in your classroom. So you want to listen to others. And so I have a talking piece, and my talking piece is a stuffed llama, because my students know that I'm obsessed with llamas. And so they're like, oh, I have the talking piece. It's no problema. I can speak now. And so that's something that I bring to them is we always have a talking piece. We want to speak honestly and from our hearts. And what I always tell my students is this world likes to finger blame. They like to point the fingers because they think that's cute. But no, it's not cute. So whenever we're in this environment, having a circle or having these type of conversations, we use I statements. So I feel blah, blah, blah. So for example, when I had a conversation about Breonna Taylor in my classroom, and the students were very pissed off, one of the things I said is, I feel hopeless as a person of color. And my students were like, I feel like I can't make a change. instead of saying there cannot be change happening or we're hopeless, they just talked about it from their perspective. And when they realize that they have their own opinions, they have things that they value, it gives them confidence in their self-identity. All right. So when we think about it from a developmentally appropriate standpoint, by really enforcing these I statements, it's really helping them find their true voice. And if we can have them go and find that true voice before they get to high school, we're really setting them up for a success. We want to be respectful and not offensive. I'm one of those teachers, I don't care if kids curse in these circles, because I'm like, it's just language. But what I do tell them is we don't curse at people. So you can curse to frustrate. So I'm like, this shit's fucking crazy. That's valid. Thank you for sharing your truth. Yes, but if you were to say you're a fucking bitch, I would kick you out of the circle, right? So helping students kind of look at the difference of how do we see language and how our language helps us convey our emotions. And so that's another thing that I'm big on in these circles. Encouraging all my students to speak, and then also talking about what happens in this circle stays in this circle. So these are all these norms that we bridge for tier 1 because we're all building relationships. So now the next question is, well, how does this apply to world language? This is super easy. So now when we're thinking about, I always do a check-in question at the beginning of a circle. So how we apply this to world language? ¿Cómo estás? So now as they're all checking in with each other, holding each other accountable, they're holding each other accountable in the target language, right? And I have visual supports because I have novice learners. So behind me, I'll have like the different emotions on a Jamboard. And so then they can unmute and they can use that visual reference to stay in the target language. So it's building relationships, but it's also keeping them accountable for the target language so that we're not like separating. Well, I'm trying to build a relationship with you and then I'll teach you a language. We can do it at the same time. And that's going to stick with them more than if we were just to stay in English the whole time. Because they're like, well, if we're going to have a deep conversation, it can only be in English. No, we can have these deep conversations and stay in the target language. I just need to prepare harder and give you the necessary support so you can do it. And that's the point that a lot of educators might not be too keen on is, oh my gosh, how much preparation goes in? But think about it. When anything for anything for us to be effective and to be successful, preparation has to come in. And so why not teach students how to express themselves in a safe space, but also meet our curriculum needs?
You're making me think of two things too. I think it was Amy Leonard that said 5 or 6 or 7 years ago, they're not new to thinking, they're new to the language, because she and I were having that conversation where people, like you said, go around and around in about way, like, oh, Chris, that's super cute. I love that. But like, I teach level 1, like I can't do that. Yes, you can. And like, and how are you scaffolding them? How are you taking advantage of whatever it is they know? And images, like you said, all of the things to go, we can talk about big, heavy stuff. We can talk about, all of the isms you might be experiencing. We can talk about all of the thoughts, but like, it may feel really simple, but to me, all of those things you just said come really back to trust and vulnerability in some big ways. And then once you've got, not once you've got, because it doesn't just happen, but like once they see that in you and in the relationship, they trust you to make the language, approachable. And then they can express, these kind of like really big feelings. And it's cool. And it's definitely not, like you said, it's not how I was taught to teach. And it's not how I was like trained to teach. So I totally get why people are like, what, how, Bethany.
And I'm fresh out of teacher school. Like I know a lot of y'all might be freshly removed, might be farther removed than I am. And literally a lot of when I was interviewing for jobs, they're like, how do you know so much about comprehensible input? Because I wasn't taught comprehensible input. They taught me TPRS. Right. But like all the new stuff in the language community, this is all stuff I taught myself and like did through trial and error in student teaching and working at Catholic school.
Right.
So like a lot of the stuff, again, we're not necessarily taught in our preparation, but that experience and then us wanting to make sure that if we are teaching the way that we learned 15, 10, 20 years ago, how's that preparing the new generations? Because you're just repeating like everything, like it's just one big cycle. We need to make sure our instruction and our strategies are reflecting the new things happening in our students' lives.
Yep.
And easier said than done. Because, you know, say if you're teaching for 10 years and you might have a binder for each unit and you're like, well, it's the third week of this unit. I'm pulling out this page. And I'm just like, well, the kids are going to fall asleep and you wonder why they don't want to be in our class. Because at the end of the day, in New York, after Spanish 1, this is an elective. So if we're not motivating our students to stay taking world language, then we could be asking ourselves, how are we going to have a job in 10 years? We got to keep that motivation going, because even though it's crappy in itself, we teach an elective class. We teach an encore class. And so we need to have that, build that intrinsic motivation in our students to want to be language learners. So A, it helps us keep a job, and B, keeps our program going strong and alive.
Absolutely. Amen.
Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking about the core values, these are some of the core values in restorative practices. And I just think about these core values, and these core values represent my life philosophy. Love, respect, inclusivity, generosity, courage, trust, sharing, empathy, humility, and honesty. Those are all things that represent who I am as a person. So when I learned about this, I was just like, this is who I am. So might as well bring it into the classroom, right? Because we all don't go into teaching for, you know, June, July, August, even though that's nice. We don't go in for that. We go in because we have these character traits and we want to do something with it to help the future. And so that these are the core values behind the circles. So when you're thinking about creating a circle, you want to think about what's one thing to get it open. So you always start off with the open ceremony. So this is just like when you're thinking about lesson planning, what's your hook? All right. So when we're thinking about our hook can be something in the target language. So we're welcoming everybody. So we should say bienvenidos, right? Or bienvenue, because I think there's a French teacher in here. But Spanish is my jam. I'm not really good with other languages. Then we want to think about something to get them thinking. So it could be a song, it could be a video, but it can also be a poem. And so then with some of these things, as we're opening up our circle, we can think of what's something that's comprehensible that we can open up our circle with. So maybe we're showing them an infographic in our target language. Maybe we're showing them a quote in our target language, and maybe giving them like a word bank in English so that they're using some of their skills to like decode the text, but then also it is something impactful and getting some rise out of them. Or it could be a mindful moment, and maybe you can just say inhala, exhala, like that type of stuff, because any form of input is going to lead to output. Right? And we can do this in these circles. Or you can do a brainstorming activity, having some sort of Post-it note thing. And you can have them on the Post-it notes, depending on where you're at, you can have them put some sort of words or some sort of feelings in the target language. So for one of the things when we were talking about self-identity and we had a circle, one of the things that I had them do was I had them write down an adjective in Spanish and an adjective in English, right? So that was one thing. And so when we were talking about who we are as a group, and this was on a Jamboard because it was virtual, students all were able to see all these adjectives in English and Spanish. And it was beautiful because they're like, this is who we are. And that was just something cool. So then you always want to check in. And so sometimes you could ask ridiculous questions, like if you were a vegetable, what would you be and why? And these questions could be really fun if you teach upper level Spanish, like talk about the imperfect subjunctive right there. If you could be a vegetable, what would it be and why? Or if you teach novice learners, it could be something a little bit more simple. Or you can ask them a question in the target language and then have them follow up with the question in English. All right, so it could be, ¿Cómo te sientes hoy? And then it's just like, if you had to be a weather, what would it be? Or something like that. Then you go over your values and your norms to get them started. Then whenever you do a circle, you always want there to be 3 questions. You don't want to overwhelm students with more than 3 questions, because the point is that you're building a dialogue with students. You're not just trying to see how much information you can get through, because that dialogue is going to jump around. And I did a circle probably about a month and a half ago with some students. The circle was supposed to be 25 minutes and it lasted an hour and 5 minutes. And I only came in with 2 questions.
Whoops.
Oopsies. I sent the emails to teachers. I'm like, these students are late because our conversation went long and I wasn't stopping it because they needed a safe space.
Right.
And like the one teacher tried to bitch me out because I'm new to my school and they're like, you can't do this. And so I CC'd the principal on there and the principal bitched them out.
Right. Good. Because I did. Sorry.
And so you want to have 3 questions. The first question, you want to be super, super open. Then the second question, you want to start getting them towards the goal of what the conversation is. So if the goal is building relationships, maybe your first question is, what does community mean to you? It's super open. So maybe when you say, what does community mean to you? And then maybe throughout the conversation, you might start switching to the word comunidad so that they're hearing this cognate, right? So they're getting some listening. So the second question is, you were talking about building community. What are character traits of effective teachers and effective students? So now we're starting to get there. We're starting to think about it. And then the third question is, if you had to create a survival manual for new students, what would you tell them about staff and what would you tell them about what students need to do? So now you're starting to get into, here's the big idea. Here's how we're going to get to a specific strand, and then here's our game plan that we're going to approach afterwards. And all this stuff can be done in Spanglish, and Spanglish is my best friend, right? So when we look at these community circles, they're not just, oh, we're doing a circle and it's taking away a day from instruction. You infuse your instruction in there. Just how Socratic circles and jigsaw and all those, constructivism models exist, that we can bring restorative practices into those constructivist models so that we are building the relationship and students are also getting something related to our curriculum out of it. And then at the end, you do some sort of checkout so you can review feelings. And so again, you can harp on emotions in the target language. And then closing ceremony is just something where it's particular to the conversation you had with the group of students. So it's memorable for them, right? Because we want to help them create specific memories.
I'm seeing 2 parallels here too. Like there's parallels with like lesson planning when you're looking at like I do, we do, you do, which also follows like in, together, out, so it's like you said, like hook it, like do a little interpretive, now like let's like back and forth a little bit, now let's do it, like let's respond in a way. And then it's also following those higher, like what's the word I'm looking for, like the gradual increase of thinking level, like you said, what, like that with the first question, second question, third question, like it all makes sense in what we know to be true just pedagogically. So it's not like you said, it's not like I was listening to Liam Printer's podcast the other day, and he said in one episode about like TPRS and CI and all these different things, how so many people think like, oh, that was nice, now let's go back to real instruction. Like, you know what I mean? Like we did that for a day and now let's go back to, like, they can't quite make the leap to realize that things like community circle is real instruction. Like you said, like, this isn't like a special separate thing. It's embedded in it.
And one of the things, I love the point that you say, oh, it's not a special thing. And if you make it seem special, then you can scare kids that way. Absolutely. If you do that. So for example, my teacher bestie, Lord, we love her. But she was trying circles out and she failed miserably. And she tells this story all the time. And so the kids, she had this one kid, and now I have her in my high school class. And the one kid, she saw that the room was set up in a circle, and she literally said, "Nah, miss, I'm fucking out this bitch." And she walked out and went to her mom because her mom is the secretary.
Amazing.
And I said, why did she have that reaction? She's just like, I only went to circles when I was doing conflict resolution, and I didn't make it as a
absolutely.
And boom. So if this is your culture in your class, students know that circles are just a part of it. Just how students know that we're going to be speaking. Right. Students know, like in my class, they know they're going to do a virtual dictionary every unit. You know, it's just a part of who you are as a teacher. And so then now you're not dealing with that, you know, the kickback of like, oh, students associating a circle to something bad.
Right.
Because it's a part of their classroom culture. Okay. So this is particular to my school, but I want us to think about, so when you're doing these types of circles and you're doing all this, what are some circle themes that you could see you implementing into your school community? For mine, there's a lot of mistrust with teachers in the community. And so a lot of us is community building because parents don't trust our school. They just don't. And I understand why, because we have a high turnover of administration. So it's always a new administration every other year. And so parents just don't trust our school. And so we're always trying to build relationships, meaningful relationships with staff and students so that it translates with our parents. So what are some things that you could see you using this instructional strategy in your classroom? Because we can look at these circles are instructional strategy that's helping us build relationships, but also helping us give our students input in the target language.
Yeah. I have to think about this for a sec.
Nice.
I think, like you said, I think it goes back to trust. Like, I know we still have a long way to go in my school about like transparent grading, even though like a lot of us are super transparent. It's still like, I mean, you're still hearing about, there's not a lot of trust there with a lot of kids, especially kids that aren't in like honors or gifted. It's that thing where like, oh, I turned in a bunch of work 2 weeks ago, it's still not graded. Or like, I mean, we have people like last week who didn't have any grades in the grade book for quarter 4. Like, we're ending Wednesday. How are they're a senior, you know? I think there's a lot of, I think that we need some strategy, like we need to be having this conversation as a school of like improving that relationship, because our honors and gifted kids, I think, are treated differently and better. And they're in classes with like, you know, they're just, I don't know, I think they're getting a more transparent, equitable school experience within like their class, but then others are like, you know, have no idea how they're progressing, et cetera, if that makes sense.
I agree with that. And one of the things that in our school, we have a lot of problems where teachers are afraid of students. I'm like, how do I get afraid of like 13 and 14 year olds? But anyways, I just asked that to myself, and then I just stay quiet. And so one of the things is I'm very clear on my expectations and how we develop things. And so one of the things that we were having as a problem in my team were students in breakout rooms. Students were causing problems in breakout rooms and then starting social media fights. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? And so what I did, and I'm going to try to change my thing. So let's see how well this works, because my lighting might not be good. Oh, and now you can't see that all the way. Yummy. Okay. Let's see. Oh, you're going on a trip.
Yay. We want the kitchen.
Okay.
We want the cooking class.
So right here, can y'all see that or not really?
Yeah, that's perfect.
So right here, I created this thing because my students were like pissing me off, and I don't get mad easily because they were being rude to each other in breakout rooms. So I stopped class and I pulled out my old-fashioned chart paper and I angled my camera and we made some strategy charts, and then I took a picture and I put it in my Bitmoji classroom of what we can do. And so I'm like, when we're having a difficult time following instructions, we can, and then we brainstormed in a virtual circle. We can ask the teacher. We can review instructions carefully. We can ask a friend to copy and paste the instructions in the chat. We can take a 30-second break to clear our minds. Let's go get a drink of water in our kitchen. You can email the teacher. You can use the chat to ask questions. We can use the question and answer feature in Google Meet, which I always keep open the whole class period. We can see what other people are doing by using Google Chat, by presenting our screen, and by emailing so that we're effectively communicating in our virtual environment. And then we created norms. Sorry, my hand is shaking.
No.
And then we created norms in our breakout rooms. Like when I'm in a breakout room, I should not talk over people. I should be respectful. I should listen to the teacher. I should stay focused. I should do my work. I should work together. And I can use the chat box if I don't feel like talking. So we did a lot of this type of work. And so I have this in my like virtual space at home. The science teacher has it in her thing, even though her cat ripped her poster. And the English teacher, and we go back to it, and the students remember like going the process of how we got here. And one of the students said to me the other day, they're like, Mr. Rogers, we've come a long way since September. I said, you damn right, because I wanted to say to myself, I'm like, I almost wanted to drink a whole bottle of Moscato every night in September. Yes. Right? Yeah. But they have come a long way. And I think it's all because of this restorative approach and having these circles and having these type of dialogues in our classroom where they know that there's always that trust factor. There's always that building community. And knowing that one hand washes the other. And we connect that to our curriculum. So for example, today in class, one of my students unmuted and said, because we're on our food unit, he was like, yo como las papas fritas, sí, yo como las papas fritas para el almuerzo. And that's literally what he said. And he unmuted. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then so I told everybody, virtual applause. So kids turn on their camera and they're clapping. And it builds that community. And like he said, I'm super proud of myself for being able to speak Spanish. And so that's like what your circles can do, and carving out the time for building these relationships in this way. And also, when you go back into person, whether you've already gone back to person or if you've been a whole virtual for a year and now you're going back in August or September, having this circle might help students reduce their social anxiety being back in the school building. It might help parents feel at ease because, you know, they're super worried, especially those helicopter parents, right? So it might just help. It's just going to help bring the students along because, you know what, the pandemic has reminded us of a lot of bad things, but it has brought out a lot of good things in the education world, and we need to tap into those things right now as we're starting to think about how we're ending our school year and how we're going to start our school year in the next year. So it's 7:55, so I want to open this up for question and answers. If any of you have any questions for me or any things that you've been doing in your school that's working, or if using this time to brainstorm effectively.
Andrea, you should also be able to unmute if you wanted to share what you had said, but no pressure. I was just reading your comment and hadn't even thought about that because we do so much same, like in our little homeroom, whatever, that I'm like, oh yeah, we could have used some of those same activities. Like that didn't even occur to me. I had to double dip.
Yeah.
I know. Well, we've been working on restorative justice for the last couple of years, implementing it. And so we do it regularly in English with our kids, but I don't know why it never occurred to me to be like, oh, I should just make this like a weekly or daily practice in my Spanish class. Cause instead of just doing my normal, hey, ¿cómo están? Really quickly and moving on to whatever, we could, a couple days a week, spend time. And I like the idea of how you could really take your questions and drill them into preparation for whatever you're teaching that day too. As getting hook and buy-in and seeing what they already know.
And this can also be really good for cultural lessons. So right now, my 8th graders, we're finishing up Deporte. So they're doing a reading on the Aztec game Pelota. And so we just watched a scene from El Dorado where they were playing the game, and we were watching it. And so we did a virtual circle, like, why are games an integral part of building community in different cultures? What games do we have in our community that bridge the community together? And those were different questions that I was able to do in a circle with my students around this indigenous game that existed in the Aztec community. And the students have been really interested, and they were also, and then I told them, if you were to say something, you need to pull textual evidence from and they're pulling out quotes from the text. They're like, well, in the second paragraph in the third sentence. And I'm like, oh, yes. So those are just different ways that you can also bring out these circles. Socratic seminars have been around forever. These restorative practices, really all it is it's a Socratic seminar. In my opinion, it's a Socratic seminar with an extra focus on relationships instead of curriculum. I feel like Socratic circles focus more on the academic perspective, and it doesn't focus in on the relationships. These restorative practices are basically a Socratic seminar with a heavier focus on building relationships and community.
It's a great way of articulating that too. Like, it's still got content, but also, wow. Yeah.
And I'm very big in getting our science and math teachers to do things because, they're always like, I'm a math teacher, I can't do that. Right. Well, you can use a circle, right? And you can talk about, who is this Pythagoras guy? Why was he important to the Greeks? And how do we apply this Pythagoras guy as we're learning math in modern day history? And how can we use Pythagorean theorem in our community? Right. And like, that was an example of a circle I brought up for math teachers, and the math teacher ended up using it. So they can work in anything. My favorite thing, Christina's amazing.
Amazing.
One of the things that I told the math teacher, because they were talking about interest rates. And our school's focusing on anti-racism and decolonizing our curriculum. That's a huge 5-year focus. And so I said, you're talking about interest rates. Talk about redlining in the community.
Literally, right.
And talk about buying a house for Black and brown people is more difficult than for white people. And they had it. And our 7th graders are like, so will I be able to buy a house since I'm Black? And like having these great dialogues. And the math teacher's like, I've never seen so many students engage in math class.
Right.
And that's what these circles do. And they also work virtually. And I meant to say this earlier, but because these circles also work virtually, because a lot of teachers are like, well, my kids don't have their cameras on. My kids don't unmute. They just write in the chat. Using Jamboard, using Padlet, using those things, that helps you facilitate these virtual circles. And also, if we think about students who might have social anxiety, that gives them the outlet because they're at home. they can use the text to speak feature a lot of times, and they're able to speak that way. And so this is if we're thinking about how we're making our curriculum inclusive by doing our virtual circles, it can also really help our ELL students articulate with what they have to do, because I'm a huge advocate for our ELL students. So virtual circles nothing's going to beat the real thing, but I always think virtual circles should be around for students who have social anxiety and for our diverse learners who might benefit from assistive technology while they are participating in the circles.
Absolutely. Well, and so many of them have said after this year, you know, like I know we've talked about this in like previous, Maris, that's exactly lit. Read my mind, get out of my head. That like they've talked about like what's next year going to be like, and I'm like, I don't know. So I'm not helpful, but they're like, I'm like, this has been kind of like terrible and kind of a relief at the same time. Like a lot of them who are just like sitting in our rooms face to face, you know, as roomies, but we've got vast majority Zoomies, and so they're like, kind of don't hate being able to do all my stuff wherever I am, but also having peace and calm and like not the like frenzy of having, we're at a really big school, so like not the frenzy of having like a few thousand people in the hallways. Like this has been not all bad, and it's like, yeah, how are we reconciling that next year? Like Maris just said, like when we're back in person, assumedly, and being like, okay, hi, we're back to normal. No, we're not. We'll never be like back to normal. So how are we sort of restoring things that we didn't even know we'd lost until we did? And they're like a step further now.
I agree. And this isn't related to circles, but Meredith is on the same thought process of me. I am a huge fan of GoFormative. GoFormative is my life. And I'm just like, I've never given good feedback as well as I have this year. Seriously. And I'm going to use GoFormative for the rest of my career.
Forever. Yes. Forever.
Right? Or Pear Deck. I'm always going to use Pear Deck. Yeah. And how does this technology, our school was never thought about being one-to-one until COVID.
Yeah.
And so now we're like, oh my gosh, we're going one-to-one. And so now this is off topic, but everybody's like, I don't know what my classroom management's going to look like, because I couldn't get the kids off their cell phones. And now we have these tablets and these computers.
Right.
It's not hard. So next year, what I'm doing in my classroom is, and this is super middle school, it might work in high school, it might not, but it will work in middle school. And I'm also using this to reinforce color vocabulary. So I'm gonna have a light system in my classroom. So red light is for no technology at all.
Right.
Yellow is for instructional technology, and green is recreational technology.
Live your best life. Right. Right.
And so that's what we're gonna have. And so I'm gonna be like, oh, la luz roja, entonces no tecnología en la clase, ojos aquí, bocas así, vamos a prestar atención en 3, 2, 1, right? But then I'm like, oh, la luz verde, entonces ustedes pueden usar su celular, all right? Don't annoy me, don't make me, remember, I don't do referrals because I don't like doing extra paperwork, okay? Thank you.
Don't make me write stuff down.
So, yeah.
We're lucky our kids don't have their phones on them. They have to put them in a little shoe holder.
Oh, wow.
So I don't have to battle that. And we've had Chromebooks. I don't understand, like, all I say is adios computadoras and they go away. Like you just lay down that, like, people are like, oh, they're going to be on their Chromebooks all the time. Like, not if you tell them to put them away. Like, I don't know. But I guess maybe some people have them taking notes and then they're on the wrong thing. But I guess when I want them to pay attention, they put the computers away, right?
I think it's like wishy-washy or like mixed messages, like you said, like, or they go, oh, well, I'm just looking up. Oh, okay, well, that's okay. Like, Maris, you can have yours, but Steph, put that away. Like, what's going on? Like,
light system.
Kids are confused. Light system.
My light system.
I like the light system.
Oh, I was looking.
Yeah.
¿De qué calor es la luz?
Right.
But I said, no hay peros en la clase de español. Sí or no? And then they'll be like, but. I said, you have 3 seconds to put your phone away. to put your tablet away, or you can pick up the white phone and vamos a llamar los padres. And that's how I am as a teacher. And like, I think the students struggle with that because they just see a young, vibrant person that they don't expect to see. Like, who is it? When I went into school the other day to help some of my students on our asynchronous day, I was walking through our courtyard and one of my students thought it was a good idea to throw crayons out of the window. And I was pissed because they were the multicultural crayons that I brought.
Okay.
So all they see me, here, I'll do it for you. This was me.
We'll throw the crayons.
I ran to their room and I was just like, why are you doing that? And he's like, well, I didn't think you would be there. When I tell you, I've never seen a kid cry so fast. I'm like, call your mom. And he's just in tears. I can't call my mom because I'm already grounded. I'm like, I don't care. Call your mom. And who is it? Mom rushed to the school in 15 minutes. I'm like, I'm not sorry.
I'm already grounded. Well, then you shouldn't have thrown crayons at me.
Should have thought of that before you mess with my crayons.
Thank you.
Yeah, my multicultural crayons.
And they were the multicultural ones. You couldn't throw any other color.
That was offensive.
Right.
It was, so.
Personally.
But yeah.
Well, that's exactly right. I think, and Maris, I think you and I have talked about this. I know we have like just about boundaries over the years. Like, yeah, like it's like you said before, it so comes full circle, pun intended there, where you were saying like, if the kids hate us, we don't have a program, you know? So like, you know, if we're not taking late work, if we're total assholes, like so many things we can do where they're like, yeah, I'm not taking French because she's the worst, you know, or whatever. And there are so many ways we have to be in a lot of ways. Like you said, like, buenos dias, clase. Okay. But then the second you flip that switch, you know, and they're like, like, oh, I didn't know you had that in you. Well, I didn't want you to know, but now you've let her out, you know, like you've let the beast out. And it's like, oh God, that was scary. I don't want to ever see that. I didn't think so. And I don't want to be that. So you don't want to see it. I don't want to be it. Let's not go there.
That's how one of my students was today. And she didn't know. So I called home today, but you know what? I'm low-key a genius. So I went to the principal and I said to the principal, I'm calling home. I'm just letting you know because the student learns virtually from school. So that she's going to have a meltdown.
Right. So you know.
And so then I called mom and I said, I talked to principal and now you, because we are one unit and that's helping with our transparency with parents. That we're working. So then I tell mom, and mom and I are on the phone for 15 minutes. And like mom was telling me about how she's struggling with her. And I'm like, I get it, sis. I get it. And so we're talking. And she's like, well, her 13th birthday is coming up. And I was going to throw her a banger. But if she's not doing her work, then she's not getting a party. And I'm just like, I'm picking up what you're putting down. I got you. And so then I pulled the student aside and I was just like, hey, so I talked to mom and you're missing every assignment for the fourth quarter. And that's not cool because you're going to 8th grade. So what are we going to do to fix that? And she's like, I don't know. I said, you do know? Actually, like, let's think about different ways we can do. She's like, I guess I can come to class more often. I said, you guess or you know, because there's a difference. So then we're talking and she like slams the door. And so then I said, ven aquí. And she's just like, well, I'm just mad. You're targeting me. And I said, I know you're about to try to call your mom. Your mom said, don't call her because I just got off the phone with her. So you can go take that attitude somewhere else. All right. And she did. And I text mom, I'm like, she had an attitude and she's going to be really sassy when she gets home. And mom said, well, she's super sassy. I might accidentally backhand her. Oops, accidentally, because I don't want. I'm like, oh my God, don't tell me that. I'm a mandated reporter.
Mandated reporter, lady.
But like, it was like so bad because she hasn't done any assignments. And I'm just like, and so I also think that the circles are helpful because you can have these conversations about what are some of the reasons why we're not getting our work done.
Right.
And then that informs what you're going to do. And so.
Absolutely. Well, and there's like, there's an expectation, but it's also like, I talk with my colleagues about this a lot. Like, kids know exactly what they're doing in a lot of ways. So let's say I miss every assignment, and, you know, as one does, and the final is coming up, I don't know, tomorrow. You know, if I know that, like, oh, Senior Schweitzer always just like, she's gonna replace it. She's gonna replace it. Like, Miss White said that she's not gonna replace it, but like, I'm sure you'll be fine because I know you're a teacher and she replaces it. Like, they know exactly what they're doing when they do a lot of things like that. Like you said, like, you think you can do it, or you know you can do, like, what are we working with here? Like, what's the actual conversation? Because I think a lot of times they're just waiting for us to go, because it is more work for us. They're waiting for us to go, like, you know what, just take the final, just take the final, and then I'll put the final in for all your missing work. And they're like, ooh, like, friggin' knew it. And you're like, no, like, so this year, especially, I mean, I told like 3 kids today, like, I missed my performance speaking. Yeah, I know, I graded them, so I'm aware that you missed that, but it closed on Friday, and that's so hard for me to do, like, a hard deadline. Like, it's really hard for me to go, like, you know, but I was like pep talking myself in the email, like, just do it, Meredith, just hit send, just, you could, like, you said what you said, and that's all she wrote, like, whatever. And yeah, like, that was really tough, because they're waiting for us to go, you know what, you're right, whatever. But I think we end up undermining ourselves, and I think we end up loving them to failure in some ways, because they don't have expectations for themselves, because they don't, in some ways, like, they're going to get on to the next level. You know, they're not, I don't know, I'm not big on, like,
I agree with that.
You know what I mean? Like,
I did something interesting for grading, and I had to consult my admin. So I'll tell you about it. Y'all are going to be like, I'm crazy. I don't put grades into our grading system until the week before progress reports are due, or the week before things are. But my grades are in on Google Classroom. And on Google Classroom, I have a red siren near assignments that could be in the grade book. So why do I do this? They know they know the possibilities of what's going to be graded. They just don't know what specific ones. So when I'm giving them feedback on the specific assignments that the whole class did well, then I put that in the grade book. Assignments that they did so iffy on, I'm like, I gave you some feedback, but now this next assignment's going to go in the grade book in my mind, but boom. And so that is something that I've done this year. And my principal was sketchy at first. She's like, I don't think that's a good idea because of parents. Because they're like, so what's going to be graded? You're not being transparent. But then, so one parent questioned me, and then she got the report card, and she's like, never mind.
Right.
Because I took the assignments that, hey, this was not a compliance assignment. This assignment was showing their skill set. It was a performance assignment. And you know what? That compliance assignment that I did have gave them the feedback and informed what they needed to know for this performance assignment. So, and that's why when I say I'm not that teacher who wants a big grade book, I want 5 assignments in for the quarter, and that's it. And that's my system, and it works.
Sure. Well, absolutely. Like, it's like, whatever, I think part of, you know, restorative justice in a lot of ways is restoring that trust in school to not be a gotcha, and to not be, and so it's like, whatever your system is that I think makes us feel good about holding them accountable. It's like the A word now. I'm like, ooh, accountable, because so many people make accountable a gotcha. Like, ooh, Tori didn't do that. 0, sorry. And I think and it's like, well, that's not helpful. Like, they mistake, I think, like, accountability with grades, with expectations, with responsibility. I'm not your parent. Like, we are not necessarily there to teach our students responsibility. They're already responsible for a lot of things. And I think one of them is, you know, finding a grading system, or finding an assessment routine that's both formative, summative, also like fits in our department, fits in, you know, like kind of our situation, but also feels like graceful, flexible, and feels right, like, in our gut. Because I want them to have to do stuff all, you know, every day. But
to me, the key to restorative justice, the key point is the point of repair. Like, the idea of focus circles and building that community is that then when we have conflict, we can go and repair the damage. We're teaching each other that, like, if you do something to somebody else, you damaged a relationship. So how do you restore that? So in the idea of grading, like Meredith, you joined me last week, my PLC, we talked about how Emery Chase just recently put out something about, she accepts late work, and kids can retake anything, anytime, no questions asked kind of thing. And that's great. And I kind of go by that same thing. But if you did have a student who abused that completely all quarter and just expected you to do at the end, well, I think I'd have to pull that student aside and be like, look, you really, I normally do this for people who don't abuse it. And what you've done is abused it. So we need to talk about what's the logical consequence here and how are we going to repair this in the right way, that I'm not just going to give you a free pass, but I'd love to see you do some work and do something. So here's how, like, it's not just, so there's that key part of repairing damage. And if we have good community and good communication, we can do that.
Absolutely. Well, like you said, logical, like this grade shouldn't tank you, but it also shouldn't elevate you to 100. Like you shouldn't go from like an 80 to a 60 or an 80 to a 104. That's super confusing for students when they're like, no, it's okay. I did all my makeup work. And I mean, we're always going to have a couple, but like when they take it up from like a 12 to a 98, I'm like, what the hell? I would have waited too. If I knew that my teacher was just going to like, can they do it on the HR videos? Can I do one and then get credit for like all 7 I'm supposed to watch? Because I don't want to watch them all. Like, what the heck? But that's super confusing for kids. And then we end up undermining our own authority, because by the time we realize that it's like too much work to go backwards and go like, screw it. You know what? Yeah, I'll just plug in your final. And kids do us dirty. Because they're like, oh, thank you, Ms. Schweitzer, you're the best, you're my favorite, I love you so much, and you're like, I know. And when I was like first starting, that was super, I didn't realize I was loving them to failure. It was my ego. I was loving them to favoritism. Like I wanted to be their favorite, like I was the jam, whatever. And now, not that I'm like disconnected from that in a lot of ways, where they're like, who, whatever, like we don't want anything to do with her. Now that that's kind of capped, it's funny because that doesn't happen as often, but I reflect on it more. I wish that had been flipped a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's like super important. And who is it? A lot of my coworkers are just like either one way or the other. Like they love to failure, or they're just like such a hard ass.
Right.
And I'm just like, there has to be that delicate balance in the middle, right? Because I think about it from me personally, I think about all the different factors and how your grade is the way it is.
Right.
And then we have those different conversations. So it's not just like, oh, well, you got all this work done. I'm going to be like, hey, you waited right to the last minute, but I know that, a lot was going on at home. I don't feel comfortable giving you a B because you don't necessarily deserve it. Because we're virtual, I know you use Google Translate, but I can feel comfortable giving you a C because I can see effort, right? And so like that's like something I've given them. And then Google Translate's a whole different conversation, because I am one of those teachers, and everybody in my department disagrees with me. I'm an advocate for translators.
Yes, they can be so helpful.
And I said, translation is a form of language input. Language input leads to language output. It's the rhetoric we use around translators that like it makes the difference. So if you're always villainizing translators, then students are going to be like, he's a Google Translate. But if we're like, Google Translate helps me, and so like I'll share my screen and I go on Google Translate, go on Word Reference, I'm like, oh, so because of this and that, and then I do a model of how I use a translator, it has made a difference. And so now kids aren't like, I use Google Translate. They're like, yeah, I use Google Translate for this. I was like, absolutely.
Right, go for it. I mean, how many times we'd be lying if we said we didn't look up words that native speaker colleagues say, my colleague says stuff and I'm like, and then I go Google it, I'm like, what was it she said? Because I forget about it. And then later I'm like, what'd she say? Me importa un bledo? What the heck is a bledo? you know, like
Yeah.
turns out it's like that much. Like it's like a thingy majig. It's like, I don't give a damn. Me importa un bledo. I had no idea. But I'm looking up like pledo, blebdo, I'm trying to remember how she said it. And I was like, you know, finally found it. And I was like, oh, and like you said, like input, when I'm trying to put, I'm guessing stuff in French, then I'm putting it like in English and I'm like, oh, I was close. I think I would have been like understandable. Like it's kind of exhilarating in that way. Why not, you know, model it and yeah, or in words, right? Thank you. Words in English. I'm like, don't know.
I think with Translate though is more like when I ask them to do something that I don't want them to use it for, and then they obviously use it, I like to just tell them, look, you're welcome to use it for a word or things you need, but like, I really just want to know what you know, not what Google Translate knows. So it's really obvious when you do a free write or whatever, when
like
so
the whole thing.
Having them know when to use the translator, when's the appropriate time to use it. I think that's more of my deal. Yeah, definitely don't want to villainize it. I like your thought on that.
I'm an asshole. I'll just let y'all know this. So if I'm getting aggravated seeing Google Translate, I'm like, Google Translate 32 out of 32. Marcus, 15 out of 32. Try again next time, bud. Te quiero mucho.
Your Googling skills are really good.
I'm like, if Google ER was like a picture, it would be your face.
Absolutely. Well, and my thing is too, I just dropped a tweet in the chat that's got, I made a bunch of GIFs, like GIF stickers that I drop on Google Slides. And one of them is just like, I'm watching you. Because I'm watching kids paste chunks of text. And again, it's like, you know, me llamo es Chris. And yet in the text box, they're like, pues si hubiera sabido, te habría dicho que. Shut up right now. You just shut your mouth. I have probably used habría anything 7 times total in 20 years of Spanishing. Don't come at me with your habría and an irregular. Okay. Like I'm not here. You know, whatever. And you're watching them paste. They're like, no, I didn't. So I just started dropping that GIF on there. And then all of a sudden you see like backspace and like a bunch of text go away. I'm like, it's right there. Just copy paste the sentence frames that I gave you. Me gusta, tengo, amo, me encanta, no me gusta. Like whatever.
Exactly.
Right there. It's
so with my high schoolers, I've done a lot of sketchy things that I thought I was going to get